Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I plan on this not being a terribly long meeting today, since we spent about 8 hours last week doing it. And some of the key witnesses that have not uh, uh, shown up to testify are not here. So three individuals, Mr. Metazadigan, Mr. Tollett, and Mr. Giles. I'll entertain a motion from the committee to subpoena those individuals uh, to come testify. And, okay, we have a motion. Have a second. Have a second. All in favor? Senator Sullivan, thank you. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Senator Gilmore.
Real quickly, I think we had a gentleman out in the audience, Mr. Tollett. I think, was that you raising your hand? Who is here?
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you.
So I think maybe that motion may need to be revised,
Yes.
considering he's here.
Thank you, Senator Gilmore. So, Representative Richmond, if you can amend your, let me get you turned on. Go ahead and punch your button. Senator,
Yeah, I'd like to amend my motion to move that we subpoena the following members of the Board of Corrections, and that's Mr. Giles and Mr. Mendezadigan.
Metazadigan?
Whatever.
Yes. Thank you. And I have a second. Senator Sullivan, have a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Motion passes. And our and staff tells me we approved the amendment, so we need to approve the motion itself. So I have a motion and a second. And a second. All in favor, say aye. Motion passes. Okay, we have the minutes to approve. And need approval of the minutes, a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Have a motion and a second. And a second. All in favor, say aye. Any discussion? Seeing none. All opposed? Motion passes. Okay, our first witness that we'll call today, and we have 3 or 4, so we'll start with, let's see. I have your papers up here. This is your list. Mr. Tollett. So if you would raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All right, thank you. Please take your seat, state your name and your position for the record, please.
My name is Brandon Tollett, and I'm a board member on the Board of Corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Tollett. So did Mr. Metazadigan provide you any advice for your testimony today?
No.
Did you meet with anyone to discuss your testimony for today?
No.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess the first question, have you ever emailed or texted with Mr. Metazadigan?
No.
Okay. Have you ever emailed or texted with other members of the Board of Corrections in relation to the issue of the contract?
I have not responded to emails. I've received group emails regarding FOIA requests for the bill, basically.
Were those email requests responses from board members to board members?
No, it was just to inform board members. I believe it was actually from our office administrator to the Attorney General at the time in response to the FOIA. I was just copied in those.
Okay, and have those been provided to the committee?
I believe so.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Senator?
Thank you. I heard your testimony a while ago about not emailing, but have you deleted any emails or text messages um, with regards to communications anywhere surrounding this matter that's before the committee?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Senator Dismaying, you're recognized.
And I'm trying to find my dates, but I think the reality is, though, you were a member of the board after most of these decisions had been made. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? Okay. Yeah. I mean, you weren't part of, the initial process. No one was calling you beforehand to ask if, who we should hire, or how we should hire, because you weren't part of the board at that point.
Correct. I was
Okay. Yeah.
not.
Just make sure the rest of the committee understands that. Thank you.
Who's in seat 81? Senator Gilmore, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lett, for being here. Appreciate it. So just sort of following up on Senator Dismang's question, at what point did you become aware of the hiring or the process that went into hiring Mr. Metazodigan? Can you sort of walk us through that? And I know you got onto the board. Just so everyone knows, when were you appointed to the board?
I was appointed to the board December 31st. I started at the beginning of this year.
Okay.
I did not become aware of the details of the hiring of Mr. Metazodigan actually until Mr. Brown brought forth a memo in a February board meeting stating that there were some issues with the procurement process that wasn't followed correctly, and the board voted to try to correct those.
So let's talk about that memo. Do you remember, just generally speaking, what that memo stated to the board?
I don't remember every detail. I remember that it said that there was an issue in the process that was conducted, or that occurred, and Mr. Brown had presented two possibilities to rectify that issue. One was a ratification letter, if I remember correctly, and the other was to file a claim with the Claims Commission.
Okay. Had there been any discussion prior to that point at all that you're aware of with you, or from staff or from other board members or Mr. Metazodigan regarding his engagement with the board and any of the process surrounding that? No conversations at all?
No, sir. I did have a conversation after the fact with Chad Brown after seeing the memo, just to try to understand the process, and to be quite frank with everybody, there's still a lot of questions that I don't understand with that process.
Well, that being said, if I may have latitude, Mr. Chair,
Recognized.
what are those questions that are unanswered for you?
Just the process that was utilized for hiring Mr. Metazodigan. And I think they're more constitutional questions than anything that'll probably be answered in court, because I have questions which statute applies as far as 702 or 711. Is there different procurement processes? And I'm new to this position. I'm still learning some of the procurement law. I'm not an employment attorney. And so I'm having to dig in and to really learn this process as we go throughout it.
Okay. So I know at one point, we've heard in testimony, at one point there was a discussion with Mr. Brown and the board, I think even within a executive session. Were you part of that executive session?
If it was where the memo was brought up, yes.
Yes. Okay. Would you tell us what was discussed as far as that memo?
The only thing that I remember that was discussed about the memo is how he was able to adopt the memo, where he got his information from, and then we went back out into normal session, and he explained further the process, or where the issues arose, and I believe the board voted just to rectify those issues at Mr. Brown's recommendation, which was the ratification letter.
Mm-hmm. So, and again, I'll keep asking permission, Mr. Chair. Okay.
Go ahead.
So just talking about how this process happened, and with the services agreement, so this procurement document that's been in question here, do you think the process was followed correctly, or do you think there was not followed at all? I'd like your assessment of that.
To be honest, I don't feel comfortable answering that on the record because I believe it's probably a constitutional or an issue that'll be addressed within the court case, within the appeal by the Arkansas Supreme Court. If I understand correctly, I think there's a distinction in between a procurement process for normal state agencies, normal state um, entities, and then there may have been a separate procurement process for constitutional officers or constitutional boards, which is the reason why the court case has been appealed at this point. I will say that I do understand this body's concern about having a 3-minute open conversation about hiring an attorney.
Okay. So I'll go a little bit further on that then. So do you have concerns about 3 minutes worth of conversation about hiring an attorney, entering into these agreements? Apparently, because under testimony, that's the only discussion that was had, yet there seems to be indications that a lot of other discussions were had and testimony backs that up. So do you have concerns? Do you wish there had been more processes and discussions as a board member?
I wasn't a board member at that time. I have had concerns about the lack of public forum. We're all here because we serve the public, and so I have had concerns about the shortness of those conversations in public forum.
Okay. And then I think my final question, I'll get back in the queue, Mr. Chair. That being said, does it concern you that the only flag, if you will, from the attorney to the board was please see attached, as it relates to the contract, the procurement document, and the changes he made to it?
I would say yes. I wasn't aware of the procurement document. We did vote to try to rectify the issue so that he could be paid. I wasn't aware. I would say yes, just to the change in the value of the contract or the cost of the contract. I think that would be something you'd want to be made aware of.
Okay.
As an informed member of the board.
No, I think that's fair. And I promise this will be my last one. So because I want to follow up on that. So when you say you weren't aware of that document, meaning you hadn't seen it, the board hadn't seen it, the board didn't vote on it.
We did not vote on that document. What we voted on was to rectify the issue that had come up. And so we had voted to rectify it. I believe Chairman Magnus had the authority to sign the document in order to rectify the issue because that's what the board voted on. Now the changes may be a different conversation, but to rectify the issue, we had already voted to do that.
But not as it was changed or amended. You didn't know about those.
No, I didn't have the opportunity to see that, so no.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gilmore. Senator Hammer.
Who would you go to today if you had questions about the procurement? Because I understood what your testimony was, is that you had questions, and I understand in a new spot you're trying to, feel your way around and try to figure things out so you make good decisions and not have anything come back and haunt you. But who would you go to today as a board member if you had questions about the procurement process?
I would ask Chad Brown about the procurement process for the agency. Those are conversations that we've had a little bit and I plan on continuing to have. I'm also I'm a student at Bowen, and so I've faculty members that I can ask about some of the specific legal questions within the statutes and those things. Additionally, the Attorney General's office usually files there's a place to go to get an opinion on those things. The issue here is that it's hard for the Attorney General, given the conflict, to be able to give that information as it currently sits.
But as you sit here today, you feel, maybe not then, but now you feel that you have a pathway to where you could get answers from any of the ones you just mentioned, set aside where we are with the Attorney General's office right now.
Absolutely.
You feel it? Okay. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hammer. And Senator Dismang, you're recognized.
Hi, thank you. And just one thing that I touched on a little bit was, and I believe this, I think you all did vote to try to rectify the situation because of the way the initial contract was handled in that 3-minute span, and authority and non-authority had advice from staff who was also, subsequently being sued in a sense. But did y'all grant the authority, that unilateral authority that was made with the changing of that contract to any individual on the board? I mean, y'all voted to essentially rectify the situation that you had, but you didn't. I mean, the way that I've read everything so far, no one granted one individual the authority to make changes or adopt changes and act, really for the full board.
No, the vote was to rectify the
Yeah,
issue.
and,
that
and,
was it.
and at some point, I'm assuming that the board's going to come back together and say, hey, look, that was in excess of what we had provided authority to do, and we need to have a discussion about that. Because that would lead to my next question, which is really, when you've been on the board, you've kind of seen, it's got to be a weird time for you. I'm assuming you hope that this is not the norm, and it should not be the norm moving forward. But as far as decisions and how they're made, one of the biggest questions I have is about process. And if there are processes that are being followed, and do we have procedures in place? Do we ensure that one board member, because you all have equal authority, is in excess of the other? I mean, how do we keep those checks and balances in place? And the only way that you can do that is through some transparency. When you're in meetings, do you feel as though, or do you believe that maybe some of the discussions have already happened prior to the actual votes, just outside of this particular issue? Do you feel like,
There are times where I've had that concern.
okay,
And I can, may I speak freely on this?
yeah,
There are times where I've had that concern, especially when I first got on the board, because of all the controversies that's associated with,
Sure.
with the things that are occurring. Some of that I've been able to rectify by looking at the depth of knowledge that the board members have. And so they may not require the same level of conversations that I require.
That's fair.
Being new. But I have had those concerns, yes.
okay, all right, thank you.
And Senator Hammer.
Thank you. Back on the procurement issue, now that you've been on the board the length of time that you have you had a chance to look at anything else historically from a procurement point of view that you've had that you have concerns about?
I have not as of yet, no, sir.
Have not as yet looked into anything, or have not as yet found anything because you have looked into it?
The things that I have seen, I haven't seen a concern because the agency has followed procurement processes for many years, and the things that we typically vote on, such as the medical contract, we've gone through those processes. The Department of Corrections has gone through those processes numerous times, so I haven't seen anything that I have had a concern with as of yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hammer. And Representative Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tillett, I'm over here. Thank you for your service on the Board of Corrections. And I have a question. You joined the board in December of 23, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And trying to follow up on the December 8th meeting where the decision to hire outside counsel was made, if I have my timeline correct. When did you first become informed or know that was going to be an item of discussion at that meeting?
I wasn't on the board at that meeting. I was appointed December 31st, and I didn't begin service until January 24th.
Oh, okay. That's why I was asking if it was 23 or not.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. So I don't have a question then. Thank you.
Senator Petty, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just following up on procedures and questions that Senator Dismain had, just to clarify one thing, you had mentioned, and then he followed up talking about the feeling or at least pushing the pause button that maybe some of these conversations were had prior to those meetings, and you said maybe it was their depth of knowledge versus yours being new, but you did have that cause for at least pause to consider, hey, what am I missing, or did I miss a meeting, or was there a conversation had? Is that basically what you were saying?
Yes, sir. At the beginning of my time on the board, I had those concerns, and I can tell you that just spending time with some of the other board members and hearing them speak and speaking to staff members within the Department of Corrections, I think some of that legitimately was from just them having the depth of knowledge that they have from the time that they've served on the board.
Okay, thank you. And one more, Mr. Chair. And this gets into the processes that, again, Senator Dismain was talking about. And it maybe hasn't happened since you've been on the board in January. But the document in question that was you voted to rectify the situation, at least in my eyes, it says it's a contract, and it implies it's a contract by some of the language in there. I think maybe the Medizan indicated that he didn't view it as a contract, but are contracts in general, I know staff attorney reviews, or I think I heard that, but do the board members review those before they're authorizing whoever it is to sign those? Do contracts like this normally get approved by the board?
Normally, we will review contracts and approve them within the agency. As far as the legal question about whether this is a contract, I cannot answer that at this time. I'm not an attorney. But we do normally review contracts. Yes.
And at this point, at least there's a debate or disagreement whether or not that item was a contract or not. Much like some of the other issues that there's a debate on, but normally though contracts get reviewed by the board before they are authorizing whoever it is to sign it, the board chair or whoever to sign those is what you're saying.
Yes, sir. That's
All right.
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, and Mr. Tollett, you're excused with the understanding that our next meeting, we're going to invite you back in case there's potential to answer more questions.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And the committee calls Mr. Broomfield. Thank you for being here, Mr. Broomfield. So if you'd raise your right hand, and do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. And take your seat, please, and state your name and your position for the record. Good. Push the button on. There you go.
I'm operating like the one at the pool pit, but that's all right. Tyrone A. Broomfield. I'm a member of the Board of Correction. I pastor Beth Amy Church, North Little Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Broomfield. Thank you for being here. And did Mr. Metazadigan ever provide you with any advice on your testimony for today?
No, sir.
Have you sat and discussed what your testimony would be for today with any other members of the board of the corrections?
No, sir.
Or anybody else?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. And so questions from the committee? And Senator Gilmore, you recognize.
Pastor, thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Chair, thank you for recognizing me. I think, again, just some of the same line of questioning. You have more experience than Mr. Tollett. So how long have you been on the board?
Yes, sir. I believe it was 1993 when they consolidated the Board of Probation Board and Correction Board together under Governor Bill Clinton. But I was off 3 or 4 years during the Huckabee administration. Then I was appointed back on by Mike Beebe and 2 times by Governor Hutchinson.
Okay, so you've been there a while.
I've been there a long time.
Okay, so you have a lot of history with this board. So, some of the things that we've heard throughout this process is maybe that there's a lack of process. So I want to kind of go back. When did you first become aware of Mr. Metazadigan being brought in to have these discussions about board function and other things related to the department? When was the first time you were made aware of him?
Okay, I'm not good on dates, but I can tell you.
Best of your recollection.
Okay. I remember because it was after the second, we've been through two trials. After the second trial, and the ruling was that we need to get, that we could get another lawyer to represent us. And that date of that second trial, I can't remember what it was. I thought I had it in my phone, but that's when we started talking about it.
So you started talking about it after the lawsuits?
After the second trial, because and I'll be honest, I felt the way most of the board members probably felt. I can't speak for them, but I feel like that, you either got to be for me or against me. And I think the way this thing was going, that at that time, and do understand, I've been knowing the Attorney General for years, but I think that time was he had to make a decision, either be for the state or be for the Board of Correction. And I don't think, the reality of it is, I don't think he felt comfortable trying to do both of them. But I can't speak to him neither.
Okay, and maybe my question wasn't very clear. So what you just said was you became aware of Mr. Metazadigan coming on as
No,
counsel for the board.
became aware we're going to look for an attorney.
Okay,
We
you're
had-
gonna, you were going to look for an
that
attorney.
that the court had given us right if we wanted one that we could get someone to fill in that position, and we didn't.
And you said that, if I'm, excuse me, if I may, you said that happened for you. You became aware of that after the lawsuit.
After the lawsuit, that second hearing, I can't remember the date was.
Okay. I guess I guess I'm having a hard time with that. So let me move on for that. We may come back to that. Do you remember the first meeting that y'all had with Mr. Metazodigan?
The first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we had just a full meeting with him. My understanding when I met him at the trial.
Okay. So you don't recall any discussions about his being hired or anything like that?
I did discuss with one of the board members.
Do you remember who
Lee.
that was?
Lee. I discussed with Lee because I want to find out what kind of. I never had heard of him. That's number one, and I'm trying to find out what kind of lawyer was he. Was he able to tackle what we had in mind? Would he be fair? And I think you all probably heard in one of the some of the minutes, because I heard it mentioned last week when I was here, that I did ask the question. I just want to make sure we're doing right.
Yes, and I remember that testimony.
So I did check on that, and I thought we had the authority to hire. Mm-hmm. Now, I also understand here that lawyers are expensive, and so I never did. I feel like he would be fair with the state. I feel with anybody, but I don't know how much they make. I know I've been around lawyers. My brother-in-law was a lawyer. I've been around my good friend just died a lawyer. So I've been around lawyers, and they get paid a whole lot better than preachers. So I just feel like
can't argue with that, sir.
I just feel like that what he would do, he would be fair, but I never remember him setting a certain amount of putting a limit to her. I couldn't be here when the chairman and Dr. Brown testified, but I do remember that one of the things that I wanted to make sure were correct was that if we did anything wrong, that it would be come back to you all and we would get it corrected, and you all tell we're corrected, and we do the best we can to correct what we did wrong. I don't know where we can ever correct it, but the bottom line is my biggest concern, senators and representative, my biggest concern is now, and I'm not trying to avoid your question, but on my way here today, I had a family member call concerned about her son, and I guess my concern is, I think, I'm not pushing you all, but I think the faster we can get this behind us and go back to the work, I think that's what you all want. I think that's what the governor wants. And I know that what I want. I left a meeting today. I'm hosting a 2-state meeting. And I shared it with one of the senators. And I told him, could I go back to the church to host it? It opened up this morning. But if I made a mistake, or any of us made a mistake, I've been around this board long enough to know that we try to do what's right, and I'm not going to be a part of not anything that's not right. But first, to your question, I've never been coerced to vote on anything. If you all will look at the minutes, there have been minutes that I did. In fact, the meeting before this meeting, I abstained from even voting, because I wasn't even at the meeting. I didn't know, what was going on. But if I'm there and I think that I'm doing right, I'm going to voice my opinion and move on. So
thank you for that, Mr.
Yes,
Brooks.
sir.
I appreciate your honesty there, and I think I can speak for everybody in this room. We just want the process to work. And,
Thank you, sir.
And we want there to be a process, and we would love to have all this behind us. And I think, just speaking candidly, I think the Board of Corrections has a big role to play in that. Mr. Chair, I'll get back into the queue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gilmore and Mr. Broomfield. I piggyback on what Senator Gilmore was saying, but it's important that we as a body because we are stewards of the taxpayers'
Amen.
dollars. That we do.
Oh, I said amen, but I'm not in church. I forgot.
So
I'm sorry.
we do things right, and that's part of what these proceedings are doing is figuring out what we did wrong and then fix it so this doesn't happen again, and then we can get back to work. So with that being said, did you know that the Board of Corrections does not have appropriations?
Yes, sir. For to pay this lawyer, yes.
So you voted to
But
approve
I
the
was
contract.
under the impression that since the attorney couldn't represent us, that there would be some appropriation somewhere. I mean, I wouldn't even want to be a member of a committee that if I didn't have some kind of appropriation. And since the court said that the attorney general, didn't do it, and from what I could hear from him, and I said earlier, Mr. Representative, that you can talk to him. We've been friends for years, but my concern was I want to make sure that we get fair process. And then when they went to trial, and they said we could. I think if you read that we had an option, and I just feel like it would be better for us to get this, and I never thought we'd get this far and deep into it. I thought we'd get it and move on.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the statement you said. I don't want y'all to misunderstand me neither. I don't think nobody would want to be here. I know you all got some stuff to do.
Yeah, we'll move on. But I guess the court said that you could hire outside counsel, but they didn't tell you how you were going to pay for it. So,
I was on the assumption, and what I was trying to say earlier, that we represent the state, and I'm still trying to figure out in a case like this, if it happened again, does a board, a committee, a commission have to raise their own money? Or do there's a way we can get money? I was under the impression that it probably was another way without the hire one when they said we could get one. And I think probably nobody thought they're going to come this long or to this amount.
okay. All right. Thank you for your comment. Senator Dismay, you're recognized.
Yeah, and I think I can help with some of the timeline and make some of what he's saying reconcile with previous testimony. You were present for the December 8th meeting. You had made some motions. Some people had seconded your motions. But when we get to the time, so the conclusion, when we get to the executive session, I don't know if you were in that meeting or not. It's not reflected that you are. There was a motion by Mr. Gass, Mr. Phelps, seconded by Gass to go into the executive session. So you're not mentioned there. They leave, and that's when we go into this 3-minute meeting. And in that 3-minute meeting, it was Mr. Watson that made the motion. It was seconded by Byers, and Mr. Watson, Byers, and Gass voted yes, and only Phelps and Giles voted no. Magnus also voted yes. And so you're not mentioned even in the vote. And
okay.
so it makes a whole lot of sense
I can
for
remember
you to
now.
say that you may have not been present for the meeting.
I was present at the beginning. But after we come at the end of the meeting, I had a funeral.
That's what it looks like to me.
And I had to leave to go to the church. I'm sorry, sir.
That's why he's answering the question. Wait, so the meeting he's talking about is after everything was already set in motion. They go in, Mr. Brown, others maybe said, hey, we've got some issues with the procurement. And to your credit, you were one of the only ones that did. You asked, are we doing this the right way? And the response was laughter, if I remember. I wish I had this
laughter. That's what you all said the other day.
Yeah. And so I would just say I appreciate the fact that you were trying to make sure that there was a process being followed, even though you weren't part of the original decision to hire an attorney. And that's what it looks like to me. And I think from everything you're saying, you were not aware that there was a search for an attorney. You'd missed the last part of the meeting. And since no one could publicly talk about it or did publicly talk about it in another meeting, you were never aware that even the attorney was hired until you come back in and find out, hey, there's something we've got to fix here from Mr. Brown or whoever alerted the board. And then that's where we are. And so you sitting before us, again, that makes a whole lot of sense for your perspective. And again, the one thing I will say is if you just look at the transcripts, you were one of the only ones to ask, is this right? And for that, I do appreciate that.
And thank you. I remember now I did have death at the church.
Okay.
And in fact, if a photographer there, I had on my clergy attire, and at the end, I had to leave, and some more action took place, but I was not there.
Yeah, there was
It's
an
coming to me now.
a important 3 minutes you were not present for, evidently. Thank you. It
No,
cost
I didn't come back.
Yeah, it cost about well, we could have all blamed.
I had to preach a eulogy.
I'm sure it was a good one, and appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Representative Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reverend Broomfield, over here. It's always good to see a
Thank you,
fine
sir.
gentleman with ties to Ashley County.
Yes, sir.
Cross it. It's always good to see you.
25 years now.
Yes, sir.
Y'all
Yes,
wouldn't let
sir.
me go.
And thank you for your service. I wanted to kind of follow up on what the senator had pointed out, because reviewing the report presented by Dr. Byers, there was no mention of you at the December 8th or the 14th meeting where the votes were taken. And I think that clarified some of the questions and some of the statements you made about when you were notified. My question goes back to prior to that December 8th meeting. Were you aware and did you have knowledge that y'all were going to seek outside counsel?
I think that, from the process that we went to trial and everything, I felt like from the depths of my heart, and if I hadn't been there, I probably would have voted to go ahead and get counsel. Because
well, my question is, prior to that vote happening and prior to showing up for the December 8th meeting, because I'm assuming, and you can say yes or no, December 8th, that was an agenda item that was on the agenda that y'all were going to discuss. So my question is, prior to showing up for that meeting, had there been discussions or had someone spoken to you about, hey, we're going to hire outside counsel?
No, no one spoken to me as such as saying this meeting going to be about that hiring of a counsel.
Okay.
But I do want to say that I knew, and from the depths of my heart, that we were going to have to get some outside counsel from the trial.
Right. And the trial's after the whole council and everything else.
Right.
So that's further down the line. But that day of that meeting, you walked into a meeting, you had no knowledge that today on the agenda, we're going to talk about hiring a lawyer until you got there and maybe saw the agenda.
Well, no, we get the agenda in advance. I knew about it because it was on the agenda.
Okay.
Anything that's on the agenda, I get it.
Well, I asked that question last week, and I didn't get clarification if it was actually placed on the agenda or if it was something that was in addition to the agenda that the board voted to add to the agenda. So no one ever gave me clarification on that. Are you saying that the attorney was actually on an agenda?
No. I said if it was on the agenda.
Okay.
I got the agenda. Now, sometime when we get there, it's stuff that is important. What we do is we make an amendment to the agenda and then talk about it. And I can't remember whether we did on that or not.
All right.
But all I do know, he made me remind that I did have a funeral that day, and I had to leave on the 8th.
All right. Well, I appreciate your clarification and an explanation on that, because the minutes in the report reflected, not abstaining, yay, nay, or anything, and that clears that up for us that you had left the meeting at that time. So again, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Hammer, you're recognized.
Thank you. With all your knowledge that's been expressed in your testimony thus far, did you find anything unusual, even though you weren't there, if I understood the testimony right? Do you find it unusual that such a decision was made in a matter of a 3-minute meeting?
I didn't really know it was a 3-minute meeting time with him last week. But I'm not surprised if I'm not at the meeting, and they got a quorum, which is my understanding is 4, that I don't necessarily have to be at the meeting for action to take place. That's just an advantage. But no, I wouldn't have been, that wouldn't have surprised me. Now, had it been 3, I'd have asked some questions. And just like I did on the meeting prior to that, if you read the minutes, I was not at a meeting. And what happened was when they started talking about certain business, I abstained from it because I can't vote on nothing I know I wasn't there to hear.
Okay. And in your testimony a minute ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said something to the effect of, and I think Senator Dismayne pointed it out as well, that you had raised the question, are we doing everything the way we're supposed to be doing, or something to that effect?
Yes, sir. And a lot of time I ask that question because we got legal counsel at the meetings, and I'm not a lawyer, and I always depend on the lawyer in the room or my advisor. Just like I'm gonna go file some taxes, I'm depending on my CPA to make sure it's right. And I looked at the lawyer and I said, "Are we doing everything?" I believe the word for legal or somewhere in this big, and I was told yes.
And which lawyer was that, or who's the lawyer you were referencing by name? Who is it?
The board, the board lawyer is our Mark Cober.
Okay. And so you were given confidence that by him that everything was okay.
Right, by several people. When the board meet, the board got 3 or 4 lawyers in the house. But Mark is our lawyer.
Okay.
Then you got some more lawyers over there, but I looked at all of them, and nobody didn't say no.
Okay, good deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hammer. Senator Dismayne, you recognize.
Yeah, and this is just for clarification, another question. That was the topic of hiring an attorney was not on the board, or it wasn't part of the agenda. That was something that came about after they went into a 30-minute executive session and then after a lunch. Again, the reason he was not aware was it was not an agenda item. It was something that was not discussed in executive committee compared, per the other board members because they couldn't have discussed it in executive board or committee, but was discussed in a 3-minute meeting after they got back from lunch. And then in that 3 minutes is where they, refresher, that's where they first said that they needed to hire an attorney and then hired an attorney within 3 minutes. Prior to that, there is no documentation by the board anywhere that the hiring of a board member was discussed publicly. And that's why when he's telling you, when he asked the attorneys, what he was asking the attorneys if it was right, are we doing the right thing, and trying to figure that out, that was, are we doing the right thing by trying to fix, this, by allowing Mr. Brown to enter into, or whoever it was, to follow the procurement process, which that would have been the correct answer. They're trying to rectify the situation.
Senator Hammer.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I asked about the 3-minute was because I just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to express your opinion here today as to whether you thought a weighty decision in 3 minutes was a proper thing to do. That was part of that. But let me go back. Let me ask you another question. How long have you been on the board again?
Altogether, probably about 93 up into the day, take away 4.
All right, long time.
Long time.
Appreciate your service both there and in the pulpit as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look to you, as they say, as a man of the cloth. Is there anything in your length of time that you have seen as a board member that you think that the board has ever done that was outside of what the legal counsel gave them advice to do?
No, sir.
So, go ahead.
If it was, I would have made sure to ask a question in it, and I would have voted no against it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And the other thing is, if y'all know me, I know Senator Springer know me, and other y'all know me. If it would have been more than a 3-minute meeting, because I can't talk in 3 minutes. So it'd go longer than 3 minutes if I had been present. Yeah.
Okay. And Senator Stone, you're recognized.
Yes, Reverend. Over this way, sir. Do you think it's proper that the board's attorney made material changes to the contract, and including the price change, without letting anybody know properly?
I don't think it's proper, but I think attorney business is. My father-in-law was a carpenter, and when you go into a attorney business, you might give one figure, and stuff pops up.
But what about the other changes that he made? Like waiving sovereign immunity and then everything else. Were those proper changes to be made?
Well, I think we need to let him testify and wait to him. If he's wrong, I think we need to make sure it be justified.
knowing what you know now, if that contract was set before you today, would you vote to approve it?
The contract,
I said, knowing what you know now, if that contract was sitting before you today to vote on as a board member, would you vote to approve it?
if I knew today, because hindsight don't help me in this case. If I knew today what was there, I would try to hold a contract and get some kind of information to make sure what we brought to you all was correct.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Senator Stoney. Are further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Broomfield, for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate your service. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm tell you, can I get an offering?
Thank you. And the committee calls Mr. Chad Brown.
I got a whole meeting tonight at 5 o'clock. I'm gonna stay a little while.
Okay.
So you see me walk out, I'm going back to the church. If you need me, don't subpoena me. Come get me.
Okay, we'll do it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Broomfield. Thank you for being here, Mr. Brown. So if you'd raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Please take your seat and state your name and position for the record.
Chad Brown, Chief Financial Officer, Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And so did Mr. Metazadigan give you any advice on your testimony for today?
No, sir.
Did you prepare for your testimony with anybody else on the Board of Corrections or discuss the issue at hand?
No,
From
sir.
previous testimony?
Other than just light conversation.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
good deal. All right, thank you. And questions from the committee? Senator Gilmore, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for being here. Would you mind just walking us through a timeline of events that sort of got us to where we are? So there's been some discussion as to your role in this contract, and I think that there may be a handout, Mr. Chair, that I had requested through the Bureau, and I don't know if that has made its way out to the committee yet, but sort of a timeline of events. So would you sort of walk through, especially, I think it was March 5th and 6th, walk through sort of that chain of events and who emailed you and who contacted you. I think there may be more things that we'll circle back, but I'd like to start there, and then we may go back to the December 8th and talk about some other things.
Sure. So as testimony's been given, on March 4th, 5th, and 6th, things started to move pretty quickly. I know I was instructed at a board meeting to get the attorney paid. When this process started, on the December 8th meeting, when the attorney was hired, my procurement staff, who do their best job to keep me between the lines, informed me that they believe the procurement law was violated. At that point in time, I did my own research, made a few contacts. I talked to Chairman Magnus about it. He also agreed that I should contact 2 or 3 people to have a conversation. I did that. That's where my memo came from, just to let everybody know that, hey, this is kind of the situation that we're in. Here's some remedies on how to fix the problem that we're in. You guys were approved to hire outside counsel. However, your funding comes from the Division of Corrections. So therefore, I believe we have to follow the state procurement law since it comes from state general revenue. Chairman Magnus did not oppose. He just wanted me to do my own research and try to figure out what the best way to go about it was. So when we started this process, we received the deadline.
Can I stop you real quick right
Sure.
there? So that conversation, I think it happened, it was testified to maybe in the ALC review committee. Was that initial date, I think, was maybe January what? When they told you to pay it after you had issued a memo. Do you remember that date?
No, sir. It was at a board meeting. I know it's in my timeline that I provided.
I think it was an executive session, correct?
I believe it was. Well, I believe it was after executive session.
It was after an executive session. There was an executive session that happened that day where where they asked you about your memo.
That's correct.
Okay, so they had an executive session and asked you about the memo. What was the discussion in there?
So the discussion in executive session, Mr. Lee Watson was the main one that had questions in the executive session. And when it boils down to it, he wanted to know the process that I came to and with the conclusion of my memo and how to fix kind of where the board is. He basically wanted to know who I had been speaking with. And he specifically asked me if I had been speaking with the Attorney General's office, because I did my best not to call names out in my memo. I don't like doing that. So when I said legal in my memo, I referred to our inside counsel at Department of Corrections, which is Mr. Wade Hodge. He helped me draft the memo, but I explained who all I talked to in executive session and how I came about formulating the memo that I gave to the board.
Okay, so that memo, do you remember the date of that memo by any chance?
I believe it was January 19th.
19th, okay.
Let me see if I can find it.
Were you aware of any discussions prior to that date of the attorney being hired, going well back? I mean, probably in December?
No, sir. No one from the board ever reached out to anybody that I know at the Department of Corrections to ask about the procurement piece.
Okay, so you were only aware when they said pay this?
I was aware when they voted on it on December 8th.
Okay.
And that's when the ball started
And then
rolling.
they followed up with you to say pay this, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I'll get back in the queue, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gilmore. So does this sound familiar? Mr. Brown says, as Chief Financial Officer of the Department of Corrections, I cannot approve payment unless or until one of the following corrective options have been taken. One, the board may submit a letter to the Office of State Procurement requesting ratification of the contract, which will go before review subcommittee of the Legislative Council and then the full council. Or upon receipt of an invoice, the board could instruct its private counsel to file a claim with the Arkansas Claims Commission seeking payment for his services. Is that familiar?
Yes, sir.
And that's in the 19 January memo.
Yes, sir. That's on the third
And then-
page of my memo.
What was the response from Mr. Magnus?
The response from Mr. Magnus and even with Mr. Watson, they both referred back to one of the orders from the lawsuits and said that they had the ability to hire outside counsel. And I told them that you may have the ability to hire outside counsel, but since we use state revenue and it comes from the Division of Correction, I believe we have to follow procurement law in order to get him paid. These are the two mechanisms to get him paid since it is coming from state revenue.
Okay. And did any member of the Board of Corrections or the Department of Corrections staff pressure you to send the contract through BLR quickly?
No, sir. I believe that one is on me, moving the process a little too quickly.
Okay. Did you ever feel like your job was in jeopardy if you didn't find a way for Hall Booth Smith to get paid?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay. Isn't it true that you were pulled into an executive session with the Board of Corrections?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How long did they question you in that executive session?
I'd say up to 30 minutes.
Okay. What did they question you about?
They questioned me about who I talked to in order to draft the memo that I provided.
So that's where the question came out. Have you been talking to the Attorney General's office?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So why did Kelly Knuckles complete the questionnaire from the ALC meeting on the 12th of March on behalf of the Board of Corrections? Because the questions posed was for the board and not the Department of Corrections.
So Ms. Knuckles works for me. I asked her to go back and review the video and list out the questions that need to be answered. And when she listed those questions out, I was talking to Secretary Wallace, and in a department the size of the Department of Corrections, the last thing you want are multiple points of contact. So we utilize Ms. Knuckles to be the center point of contact for the answers to those questions. So we submitted those. If they were for the board, we sent those to Ms. Sherry Gray. If they were for the department, we handled those in-house. Ms. Knuckles compiled what we gave her and put them in one document.
Now, probably in reality, the last thing you want in the Board of Corrections is not follow a procurement process. But Senator Gilmore, you're recognized. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, Senator Gilmore, go to the next one. Next. Senator Gilmore escaped. So Senator Hammer, you're recognized.
Could you talk about the 12-minute meeting you had with Ed Armstrong as far as the content, what advice you were given, and did that play a role in any advice that you gave to the board?
Sure. So I contacted Mr. Armstrong. He was the director for the Office of State Procurement at the time. I've known Mr. Armstrong for several years, so I wanted to call to get his input since I knew this was going to come his way at some point in time. I tried to keep most of my staff out of this process for reasons, but when I talked to Mr. Armstrong, I basically laid out the situation that was at hand. You have some lawsuits going on. The board hired an attorney out of a board meeting. No one on our side was contacted. The board does not have their own appropriation and funding, and therefore it comes from our budget. So I was basically asking his opinion based on the lack of appropriation and funding, and it comes from state general revenue. Are we required to follow the procurement process? His answer to me was, Chad, I cannot give you my formal opinion on this, but I will give you my opinion as Ed Armstrong. I think you're going down the right path. And that's the extent of what he told me. He never gave me any concrete information as to, yes, they do, no, they don't. It was just said he thinks I'm going down the right path.
Define right path.
Right path means in order to pay this attorney, we need to follow the state's procurement process and the law. And so since they got into this, I believe incorrectly, we need to come before you as the legislature and ratify what took place and get that corrected for the potential of this attorney getting paid. As I look back on this process, I'm not real sure the department should have been involved in it. This is not a department contract, and I've played this over in my head several times, even up until I
And
get
when you
called
refer
up
to
here.
define which department you're referring to.
That would be the Department of Corrections.
Okay, go ahead.
So I consider the Board of Corrections and the Department of Corrections two separate entities. This is the board's contract. I heard Mr. Metazodigan make some statements that he felt that I should have negotiated this contract. It's not our contract. This is the board's contract with Mr. Metazodigan. Any changes that were made to that contract, I don't feel it's upon the department to negotiate those changes. And I've had a hard time separating. In this conversation, you have to separate the board versus department, and not versus as in competition, but the board and the department. The board, to my knowledge, has never gotten into a contract on their own. Mr. Madison and I have talked about that several times. We've gone back in ACES and looked. We can't find where the board has procured a contract since I've been here. The department has, and the department has protocols in place to catch these kind of nuances when there's changes to a contract. I believe after thinking about all this and what took place and things started moving quickly, someone on the board or their staff should have been in contact with OSP, state procurement. If that were the case, this SRV form that is in question would never have been created in the first place. The problem is when you look on OSP's website, the board would not have any option to utilize that portal because when you do the drop down, there is no option for the Board of Corrections. There is no option for a proper way to fix something that has been messed up for the Board of Correction who's never gone down this path before. So therefore, we felt it was on us to help fix this issue for them. I'm not sure looking back that was the best decision made. Things were happening quickly. You can see the timeline that I provided. Things were happening very quickly. And looking back on it, as Reverend Broomfield said, I think what should have happened is the board should have written their ratification letter. It should have been submitted to OSP by the board. Somebody from the board or on their staff should have been in contact with state procurement and let them know that we have no option to get something on y'all's agenda and what that process looks like. Because the department process, we have our process to get on y'all's agenda to ratify a contract that we have messed up. There's not that process. So there's multiple things around this whole issue that needs to be addressed. If boards can get into contracts, they need to have the ability to go through the proper protocols to do that with you guys getting approval from y'all.
And so it would be proper to say that the board did not have authority to enter into a contract the way the law or way procurement laws currently allow. Is that a fair statement?
Well, respectfully, Senator, I'm not an attorney.
Okay.
Not sure that I want to be after this, but
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Then let me ask you this one. I'll yield, Mr. Chairman. And if you want to answer it, fine. I'll give you a escape door out. You don't have to, but I want to ask you. So do you think it was a matter of there was no process in place, or do you think it was a matter that the processes that were in place were not followed?
I don't think there's a process in place on the board side of the equation because, again, they've never gone down this path before. So this is a new process.
But it's a self-created process. Okay.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hammer. And so to follow up, piggyback on Senator Hammer's question. So if there's not a process in place, would it make sense to you for somebody to say, we don't have a process here, what do we need to do? Consult state procurement or somebody to figure out the proper way to do it?
Well, that makes sense now. But of course, as we all know, that's how policies get created. Something doesn't go right. Protocols, policies get put in place to prevent that in the future. I don't know. This all happened so quickly that we as the department, we normally handle administrative functions for the board. But those are normal processes that always take place. This process has never taken place, and we assume that role anyway. We didn't stop to really think, you know what, maybe this is not our role and we shouldn't be involved in this. So looking back, if I had to do it over again, that's the process I would use.
Did anybody notify you that contract had been altered or edited?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Magnus, Lee Watson, Sherry Gray, nobody mentioned anything to you about it being altered?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. And Senator Hammer, you're recognized.
So just for the record, because some may not have the benefit of the timeline that's been handed out to us, I just want to get it on the record. The time that you spoke to Mr. Armstrong was while he was still employed with the state agency. He is not employed now where he was at the time that you asked him or you had that conversation, correct?
When I talked with Mr. Armstrong, he was still the Director for Office of State Procurement.
Okay, I just want to get that on the record that because he's not there now, but he was then. I just want to get that on the record. Thank you.
Senator Gilmore, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. I stepped out of my seat for a second, and so I asked the chair's forgiveness for that. But thank you for allowing me to follow up. So, Mr. Brown, thank you for compiling, at my request, this detailed timeline as you understand it and experienced it. This is basically a sequence of events that led us to where we are here. I think we've sort of covered some of the December 8th stuff and, you know, lots of issues there, I could argue, and have argued. And so I think what we see is a general lack of process. I want to go down to January. So January 2, there's a conversation with Mr. Colbert. So you said there's a text first, and you had a conversation with Mr. Colbert. So Mr. Colbert, for everyone's awareness, can you tell us who he is?
He is the attorney for the Board of Corrections on staff.
Works for the board.
Yes, sir.
I think they've referred to him previously as a compliance attorney.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So can you walk through that conversation?
Sure. So this was part of the conversation I had with Chairman Magnus. Mr. Colbert was the first person he wanted me to reach out to. So I reached out to Mr. Colbert. I kind of didn't go in any order. I got a hold of Armstrong first. Mr. Colbert was next. I talked to Mr. Colbert based on advisement from Mr. Magnus. Mr. Magnus said that Mr. Colbert is our attorney, so make sure you go through him first. I did when I spoke to Mr. Colbert, and I told him that we are going to be sending a ratification letter, and I know there's going to be an invoice coming. Basically, everything that was taking place, I said, I'm going to send you a couple of questions, and we're going to have to figure out how to answer these questions. Those questions are, I would have to go back and look. Basically, they involve two things. The first thing was the procurement aspect of the attorney that they hired on December 8th. The second thing was reimbursement payments for previous board member Whitney Gass. Once her appointment expired, I was trying to figure out when we can reimburse her and when we cannot, based on all of this taking place while she was on the board. So those were the two things. Mr. Colbert called me after I talked to him the first time, and he said, "Don't send me this in an email, please." He said, I really don't want to be in the middle of this.
Wait, well, could you restate that?
He told me he did not want to be in the middle of this.
Okay, and he said specifically don't put it in an email?
Correct.
Okay. Why would he not want it in an email?
He said based on the lawsuits that were taking place, they are getting FOI'd like crazy, and that was his reasoning.
Okay. Is that, I mean, okay, so I'm a little bit concerned by that in the sense of we've heard other testimony where there's been conversations about, intentionally trying to avoid FOIA. That testimony happened just, a few days ago in another hearing like this. I mean, is that standard practice? Is that the process? Is that the norm? I mean, I find it, I hope I'm not the only one that finds that concerning.
Well, Senator, I can only speak for myself. I've been doing this for 23 years, and I understand FOIA. I try not to get around it because I'll find myself in this situation right here.
Okay. Please continue if you would, going through that chain of events.
Sure. So the third person I talked to, and I've known him for several years also, was the controller for the Department of Finance and Administration. And I knew he really didn't have a dog in this fight. But I wanted his, and I'm talking about Mr. Andy Babbitt, but I wanted his background from legislative audit, because I know that's where he came from. And I basically laid out the same discussion with him that I had with Mr. Armstrong. And of course, I was not expecting Mr. Babbitt to give me a concrete answer. Like I said, that's not in his purview in this matter. But when I explained to him that the board does not have an appropriation, nor do they have their own funding, it comes out of Division of Correction. I believe we should have followed the procurement process. And he said, "Chad, I believe you're on the right path, and I think you need to stick with it."
Okay. And so you were trying to follow that process?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So going back a second ago, and I'll be done with this question, Mr. Chair. Going back a second ago, we talked about a discussion that happened where they pulled you in, I think later in, maybe later in January 18th or 19th, I don't remember exactly which, or around that time. They pulled you into an executive session. How long were you in executive session with the board?
20, 30 minutes.
20, 30 minutes. And that was the only thing discussed, was questioning of you?
Yes, sir. That was the only thing discussed.
Okay. So there was no other comments or questions about your employment or anything like that?
No, sir. They really wanted to see if we had been talking to the AG's office.
Okay. So, and what was that discussion? Do you remember the question that was asked, whether or not you were? I guess the implication was you were colluding with the AG's office.
I would assume so. Mr. Watson started the questioning. He was on the far left of the table in the conference room, and I was sitting at the head of the table. He asked me to pretty much walk them through how I came to what I've come to, and I basically explained the timeline the best I could I talked to Mr. Magnus, I talked to Ed Armstrong, I talked to Mark Colbert, and I talked to Mr. Babbitt from DFNA, and that's how I arrived at my memo. And they said, and Mr. Watson said, "Well, we noticed you said you conferred with legal in your memo. Can you specify who legal is?" And I said, "That's Mr. Wade Hodge, legal for Department of Corrections." And he said, "Do you know if Mr. Hodge has been talking to the AG's office?" And I said, "I'm 99% sure he has not. I don't know what he does on his personal time with that other 1%, but to my knowledge, nobody here has talked to the AG's office."
Okay. And were they in executive session for any period of time before they called you in?
Well, of course, when you're standing outside executive session, it feels like hours.
Sure.
But I would say I probably stood out in waiting maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. But for the time that you were brought in, it was specifically related to your memo and only your memo, and questioning your memo, and your employment or anything else did not come up.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I'll get back in the queue, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gilmore, and Senator Stone, you're recognized.
Mr. Brown, in regard to this contract, do you believe that the Board of Corrections operated outside their scope of authority, in your opinion?
Sir, that's a tough one for me to answer. The only thing that I'm worried about when it comes to the board and what they've done is the procurement piece and trying to fix the procurement piece correctly. So anything that has taken place, I'm not a legal guy. I don't know. I'm just looking at the process and trying to figure out the correct way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Stone, and Senator Petty, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, thank you. Just a clarification on your timeline here. You had mentioned the December 8th board meeting where they voted to hire an attorney, and then that same day, one of your notes is that Ms. Bailey informed you the procurement law was not followed after the meeting. Was she at the meeting? Is she normally at the meetings?
She's normally there, yes, sir.
Okay. And do they get an opportunity to speak up when or do they feel like they can speak up if like in this situation, she felt like procurement law was not followed? Was that after she left the meeting and went back and did some research, or was it pretty much immediately after the meeting she felt like that procurement law hadn't been followed? Give me an idea on the timing.
Sure. So after the board meeting, like I said, everything happened quickly. I would say before close of business that day. I don't remember an exact time or how long it was before she came and told me, like, hey, I think they violated procurement law. Standing up in a board meeting and for better words of conversation, yelling out that you violated procurement law is probably not the best place to do that. So when Ms. Bailey told me that, it was in our best interest. Before I contacted anybody and told them what we thought, it was in our best interest as a department to go back and research and make sure what we were about to do is correct. The reason we wanted to make sure what we were about to do is correct is why we're sitting in front of you today.
You're recognized.
So between the 8th and the 22nd board meeting, did the position of Ms. Bailey or you or anyone change to indicate that maybe you had, after all, followed the procurement law? Or because at that point, someone, at least a person or two, felt like procurement law was not followed, and yet we are retroactively engaging the services of the attorney. Did anything change or any other conversations afterwards? Like you said, not in the middle of the board meeting standing up and shouting it, but were there conversations between then? Because a lot of time has lapsed between December 21st and now, or when we first started having these hearings. So did anything change to say maybe we are okay, or we did follow, or give me some...
No, sir. I have not changed my opinion on this since December 8th. The only reason I have not changed my decision on this since December is because it's paid for with state general revenue. Utilizing state general revenue, you have to follow procurement law. So what we did, when I say we, it was myself, a few people on my team in the procurement division, that would be Ms. Heather Bailey, one of them, and a couple of other people on my team. We started doing our research. I started having conversations with Mr. Wade Hodge, since he's an attorney, trying to figure out what the law says, if there's an exemption, if there's not an exemption, who's exempt, who's not exempt. We tried to find everything we could before I reached out and had a conversation with Chairman Magnus on how to go forward. Once we came to that conclusion and we felt like we were correct, I had a phone call with Chairman Magnus, and that's when he said, Chad, you need to reach out and speak to those people that you recommended to me, which were Mr. Colbert, Ed Armstrong, and the controller at DFNA.
You're recognized.
Sorry, one last follow-up. So that obviously, the research that you and your team did occurred, and you reached your conclusion after that the December 22nd date, or would it have been before the 22nd board meeting date?
Well, I would say we reached our conclusion on January 19th when we finalized our memo that went to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Representative Tara Shepherd.
I'm right here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being here today. I want to make sure that I understand your testimony today correctly. From what I've gathered so far, it appears that you're here for how they went into the contract. And after you realized that they did not follow the law, you reached out to the board, Chairman Magnus. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and at that point, I also heard you state it's not so much, it's how they went about it. But you also stated because this has never happened before, there are no processes in place. So it sounds like to me as if this was something that was the board didn't attempt to intentionally violate law. It's because they entered into a contract that they didn't know they could not enter into. And then there was also no process in place to show them what to do. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
In the executive session, they asked me a couple questions about that, and I told them, I said, I cannot pay the invoices coming my way. And they asked why. I said, I don't think you guys as a board maliciously did this. However, if I pay this invoice thinking that we violated procurement law, now I will be in trouble for it. And that is not something I was willing to put my 23 years of service at stake for. So I wanted to make sure if we have a bunch of attorneys and they cannot all agree that a proper process has been followed, then me as the CFO, I'm not paying an invoice. So if all the attorneys can agree, I'm good to go. But if they're not, I'm out.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
You're recognized.
So as the CFO, and I understand directly that there's a separation between the Department of Correction and the Board of Correction.
Yes, ma'am.
So what would be your recommendation moving forward as it relates to the Board of Corrections and possible future contracts?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think the board's authority to get into a contract is going to have to be handled on the legal side of the equation. I don't know the answer to that question. On the procurement side, that will follow whatever the court decides. If the court decides that the board has authority to get into a contract, then I think protocols need to be put in place, not only from the department side, but from the board side, from the state procurement side, maybe from an appropriations side where the board gets their own appropriation and funding. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle that I think need to be put together, but I think we need to wait on the courts to decide how we're going to go forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ms. Shepherd. And Representative Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, my question goes back at the end of the audit report that was provided to this committee by Dr. Byers under the recommendation that the board establish a protocol for development and submission of procurement documents. Has anyone spoken with you on a draft or providing input in the preparation of that protocol and procedures for development and submission of procurement documents?
No, sir, not yet.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Beatty. And Representative Brown, Matt Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Brown, during your career with the state, how many of these services contracts would you estimate that you have been involved with or have reviewed?
That's a great question. I would say a lot.
Would you say hundreds, thousands?
We're not. I don't know if I want to go hundreds and thousands. I'd say
hundreds or thousands.
I'd say up to 100.
Okay. Follow up, Mr. Chair.
You recognize?
With your review of these contracts, have you ever come across where the boilerplate of a services contract has been altered or edited?
I have not. No, sir.
And then one final follow up, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
On the services contract here, and I apologize if you don't have a copy up in front of you, but I noticed in the top right-hand corner of it, it says procurement method, and then it says emergency/exempt from law. Were you the one that prepared this contract originally, I understand?
We prepared the contract originally, yes, but we did not do that one.
And that was what I was about to say. So was the exempt from law another one of these edits that was made to the contract by the attorney?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And seeing no further questions, Mr. Brown, appreciate you being here today. Thank you for your very frank and answers to our questions. And so you're excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you, the last witness for today will be Mr. Wade Hodge from the Department of Corrections. So members, we'll be meeting again on the 22nd of April at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll convene again since we're subpoenaing a couple folks that'll be here. So we're going to knock it off early today, and then we'll reconvene on the 21st. Representative Springer, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you. Could you inquire of the Bureau? It's my understanding the previous testimony that Mr. Apton indicated that he had represented the executive committee of the Legislative Council. Could you inquire about what process that they utilize in order for that representation to take place, and maybe that will help shed some light on what's taking place here today? Can you do that?
So you're wanting to, and I think after, if you'd like, get with Miss Jill Thayer back here, and she can explain that.
Okay. Yes, but based upon the testimony today, yeah.
So your Representative Springer, your question is about how the Bureau went about contracting with Mr. Metazadigan?
Yeah, yes. Seems like it's a similar process here, and maybe they can assist in assisting the Department of Correction on how they did that, based upon the testimony that I've heard.
Okay. Our brilliant Ms. Marty Garrity is going to come to the microphone. And excuse us just a second, Mr. Hodge, if you'd like to sit down over there, and we'll get you here. You can sit right here at the table. You don't have to go all the way back there. Thank you. And Ms. Garrity, if you would just state your name and position for the record, please.
Marty Garrity, Director of the Bureau of Legislative Research.
And Representative Springer, you're recognized to answer your question of Ms. Garrity.
It's my understanding, based upon the previous testimony, that Mr. Abington indicated that he had represented the executive committee of the council with respect to some issues within your department. So how did he go about? Because, I mean, there's the executive committee and then there's the ALC. So how did he go? What process did you all utilize in hiring him? It may be something, I'm thinking maybe it's something that the Department of Corrections can use in this board here, because it seems like it isn't to me it's kind of confusing. So if you can help us understand how that particular entity went through it, and what maybe they can utilize some of the things that you all did in order to get this corrected.
So first of all, the House, the Senate, the Bureau of Legislative Research, and I'm not sure about legislative audit, are all exempt from the procurement laws. So, and then it went before executive subcommittee as an emergency action under the ALC rules. If there is an issue that is an emergency, the co-chairs of Legislative Council can approve that. And that was the method, because we are in the middle of a session and only executive subcommittee of ALC is authorized to meet during a session. There was no other body to take that up.
All right. So that explains it then. Maybe there needs to be some rules adopted similarly. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Springer. Any other questions from Ms. Garrity from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, we do have another one. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Garrity, why are we exempted from those procurement laws?
Oh, I don't know. That piece of legislation and that law was passed before my time here, so I'm not sure of the intent.
It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we're constitutional officers?
I don't believe so, because it is in the law, specific exemption from the procurement laws.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Ms. Marty, for taking the question. So, Mr. Hodge, if you would stand, raise your right hand, and do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give it shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, Mr. Hodge, and please take your seat, state your name and position for the record.
I'm Wade Hodge, Chief of Staff for the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge, for being here. Were you told by any member of the Board of Corrections to pick a team? And who do you think you work for, the secretary or the board?
Mr. Magnus did indicate in an open board meeting that we needed to pick a side.
Okay. And why did Kelly Knuckles complete the questions from the Legislative Council meeting on the 12th of March, since she's with the Board of Corrections and not the Department of Corrections and not the board?
Yeah, I don't believe that she did complete those. Kelly's task, as I believe Mr. Brown indicated in his testimony, was to go back and listen to the committee meeting and outline the questions that the committee asked that we had indicated we would get them responses to. And so I think Kelly's only responsibility was to note what those questions were. I don't think Kelly answered any of the questions.
So going back to my original question, why do you think that Mr. Magnus asked the question of you, who do you think that you work for, the secretary or the board?
I don't recall that specific question from Mr. Magnus.
Okay, so you don't remember that at all?
I don't remember that question.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator Gilmore. Senator Gilmore, you recognize.
Thank you. And you may have already addressed it. I was at another meeting. This is a day for meetings. So we heard testimony from Mr. Brown talking about, question whether or not there was questions from the board or whether or not he had been talking to the AG's office. And I think that, he turned around and said he had talked to you and he didn't know who you had talked to. So that's already been asked the few minutes I was out of the room. Would you mind answering whether or not you were in consultation with the AG's office and anything else?
No, sir, I did not consult with the Attorney General's office in the preparation of that January 19 memo.
Okay. Were you ever asked that by the board specifically?
I was not asked that by the board.
Okay. Did the board give you any sort of indication of how they wanted you to operate? Did they tell you not to communicate? Did they tell you, was there any sort of comments along those lines?
Mr. Magnus indicated to me that if I needed legal advice, I was to call either him or the board's attorney, Mark Colbert.
Okay. All right. And I presume that you followed that advice?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is Mr. Magnus an attorney?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Hodge, seeing no further questions from the committee, you're excused.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. So committee, we're going to knock off today since we're going to be coming back on the 22nd of April at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we'll have some, hopefully we'll be able to put this to bed or come up with some recommendations going forward. But I want to make sure everybody understands the reason the subpoenas are being issued for people. When people refuse to comply with invitations of the legislature, that creates a lot of problems for us. We can't get answers to the questions that we have. We're responsible for 3 million people's taxes and making sure that those are expended properly. And believe it or not, this body has some authority. We don't use it that often, but when the legislature is ignored, then it is our responsibility to hold those people accountable. In order to get them into this room to answer questions of this body, the answers to our constituents in the state of Arkansas, we'll use the subpoena power. And that's exactly what we're going to do with the next committee meeting. And With that being said, I hope you all have a nice weekend, and we'll see you again on the 22nd. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.